Last episode, we broke down what perimenopause is actually doing to your hormones, your metabolism, and your body composition. And today, I'm going to walk you through exactly what we focus on with our clients in this phase that actually moves the needle, all straight from our coaching practice.
I wanna heal, I wanna feel like I'm close to something real, somewhere I belong.
But first, as always, if you're new to the show, my name is Gavin Scribolito. I'm a functional health coach helping women stop fighting their bodies and actually start to understand them. And my mission is to help make health, nutrition, training, and mindset all seem simple and doable. I've helped over 200 women transform using our root method, addressing the underlying root causes of their symptoms so their body can finally respond and heal. All right, so what we're talking about today is kind of piggybacking off of first episode. We dove really deep into the kind of mechanisms at play, what's going on hormonally, and it all pointed to the same thing. It pointed that this phase needs support, not more restriction, not more intensity, and this is where things really start to shift. And there's four main areas that we want to address. We want to address, obviously, most importantly, your nutrition. We need to address your sleep and some practices that could be holding you back, and we need to address your training, kind of shifting from the gear of we need more cardio to actually prioritizing resistance training. And we need to focus on stress management. That is what I consider a core four foundation for supporting your body through menopause. Okay, and this, I'll be honest with you, this is not a trendy approach. This isn't all sexy and shiny and rainbows. I think that a lot of the industry, starts to try and sell you some new fancy thing, whether it be a supplement or this like menopause weight loss, workout. And I think that it's a lot of hoopla. What works is the foundations. What works is what's boring. It's not trendy. And this is what the actual research we have right now supports, but also what I see work best in practice for all of the women that we do work with. Now, starting off with the most important thing, let's talk about nutrition. Okay. Food quality always comes first. And this is where I think a lot of things get really messed up with, understanding fat loss, understanding health. I am a huge advocate of flexible dieting. I'm a huge advocate of tracking macros, calories, macro and calorie tracking in general is a foundation that I do focus on a lot with clients. But I think that the problem with things like flexible dieting is that so many things start to get missed, like, food quality. We have some people that say, oh, the only thing that matters is calories, and the quality of food doesn't always matter. Then you have some people on the other side of things that say the quality of food is all that matters and calories don't matter. Or you have, the insulin gurus that say insulin is the only thing that matters. Cut your carbs out and, you don't need to track your calories. And they all are missing points. I think that it all goes together. We need to understand calorie consumption, but that doesn't mean that, it's sacrificial of quality of food or that the quality of food is just overriding the fact that calories matter. At the end of the day, I've seen so many women come to us and they have been eating healthy and their food and their diet quality is fantastic, but they're not monitoring their calorie intake and they start to feel frustrated because they are doing all these right things and they're eating healthy, they're exercising, but they're still not seeing progress. And there's so many caveats to that, but at the end of the day, what we have to understand is that just because you are eating nutrient-dense foods does not mean that is void of calories and that you don't have to still be mindful of how many calories you are consuming. That could go both ways, whether you be under-consuming or over-consuming. But no matter what you eat is going to directly influence inflammation in your body, your gut health. It's going to influence blood sugar regulation and hormone clearance, such as estrogen metabolism, which gets directly cleared through your gut. Now, we're talking about one of the paramount and most foundational cores of any diet. You're probably like, oh, of course, here it comes. Protein. Okay, you're probably sick of hearing protein, but there's a reason. Okay, protein is obviously the anchor of what's going to build muscle, which is going to support better metabolic rate. Okay, protein becomes even more critical with age, mind you. Now, there's not just a component of it building muscle, right? Obviously, protein is required to be the building block of muscle tissue. But what we also have to take into account is that all foods and all macronutrient status has a thermic effect of feeding. So all foods conserve or actually burn energy when you eat them. Okay, so this is actually a mechanism of your metabolism. We have like BMR, we have your energy activity, your NEAT, which is non-exercise activity thermogenesis, so like moving, walking, etc. And then you also have TEF, which is thermic effective feeding. That is actually literally a mechanism of your metabolism where your body has to actually utilize energy to digest food. That process does take energy. That is a metabolically active process. So when you digest food, all different of the macros, your carbs, fats, protein, they all require a different amount of energy to break them down. Fats require roughly around 2 to 4 or 5% to break down. Carbs are about 5 to 15% of energy. Protein has a thermic effect of around 30 to 40% of breaking down. So what that means is that at least 30% most of the time in adequate digestion, when you eat protein, 30% of that energy that you just consumed and the calories that you just got from protein is going to be burned trying to digest that protein. So you can quite literally boost your metabolic rate by eating more protein because it is harder to break down. So your body has to work a little bit harder to break it down. And it also obviously is going to be sent to your muscles, repair tissue and stuff. So that can directly boost metabolism. But we're talking about regulations and what we kind of focus on with a lot of clients. And this might alter and change, as a client becomes a little bit more advanced. But a good recommended starting point for just about anyone is going to be to start at around 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight. So if you weigh 120 pounds, that would likely look like you trying to get in, anywhere between, like I would say, roughly 100 to 120 grams of protein, give or take, would be a good ballpark. Don't quote me on the math with the 0.8 there. I'm not a decimal guy. But, if you weigh 150 pounds, maybe that might look like you might want to sit around somewhere between 120 to 150, right? And now what we have to take into account is the relativity of where you are with your current protein. We've had a lot of clients that are nowhere even near that. They weigh 150, 160, and they're consuming under 100 grams of protein. Obviously not realistic to jump from 60 grams of protein a day all the way to 150. So we have to titrate very slowly. If you're doing this on your own, what I usually recommend is starting to jump up from 20 grams of where you are in that given day. So if you're at 60 grams daily for the most part, start to go to 80 grams daily. See how you feel after about a week or two, then bump it up from there. We have to keep in mind that since protein is harder to digest, we don't want to just try to jump the gun. You will notice bloating, probably a little bit of extra gas because your system, your stomach acid doesn't have the enzymatic, function to actually break that much more protein down. So it has to be titrated up. So you do want to go a little bit, slowly with that if you're doing that on your own. We do that in practice as well. If someone comes to us very severely low, we find, a way to gradually climb up until they get to that 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of threshold. So that could be a good starting point for you. As far as fiber goes, fiber is going to be the second most important variable here. Okay, obviously it doesn't just help with regulating bowel movements, which is huge and crucial, but it obviously is also going to feed your gut microbiome. So the bacteria strains in your gut, we have trillions of them. They all support and regulate very specific digestion functions. Also are regulating a lot of things that can play a role in either supporting a healthy gut microbiome or a more dysbiotic gut environment, which can actually fuel inflammation, which can lead to systemic inflammation, and that can start to influence hormone metabolism as well. So we have things like estrogen clearance as well that's going to play a role with that. Your estrogen is directly influenced by bowel movement regularity. We talked about that in the first episode, which can drive, a little bit of some more, vasomotor symptoms, worsening, a lot of symptoms that you're going to experience through perimenopause, like hot flashes and stuff like that. But that can also continue to fuel a little bit more inflammation there as well. Obviously, this is also going to play a role in stabilizing blood sugar and cravings. Fiber is obviously a very high satiety overall nutrient. And that also can mean that you're choosing higher quality carb sources. Okay, there's a lot of studies that I've actually shown. Keep in mind, most of these studies that we looked into are done in animals. So, rodent studies, take that with a grain of salt, obviously, but it can point to some interesting facts that we can actually see that the gut microbiome via fiber can actually impact your gut health in a way that can either support weight maintenance after weight loss or set you up to regain weight. Now, most of this is done in lean mice versus obese mice, where they actually have shown that if they actually took the microbiome of an obese mouse, like the bacteria strains, and they actually had it put into a leaner mouse and shifted that mouse's microbiome without changing the actual food intake of that mouse actually started to gain weight. But they have actually seen that when you actually lose weight, in these mice, you actually can start to see it shift, but it takes time to shift. Actually, I think the study was somewhere around like 1 to 3 years, maybe more, of like actually it taking time to shift the gut microbiome. So again, really cool stuff. All it does is really point to the fact that fiber sources can start to actually influence that. So what they did see is that the mice that did lose the weight who had higher fiber intake actually had an easier time maintaining weight after that versus the mice that didn't have as much of a high food intake, fiber intake. Sorry. So again, very interesting kind of research around that. But one thing we have to take into account as well from that is not even just that alone, but just even in in humans, if constipation occurs, what we have to keep in mind is that we have certain metabolites which are end products of metabolism. So for example, think like when you take a drug like a Tylenol, that is metabolized in your body, and we have what is known as metabolites, which are going to have to be excreted out of your body after it's utilized. But we also have that in just about any metabolic process in your body. Certain things can be recycled, like hormone metabolites and stuff like that, like estrogen, for example. Metabolite of estrogen, there's different pathways that it can take to be cleared. And that can either lead to, positive outcomes, or if it's shifting and being reabsorbed, it can lead to poor health outcomes. But when we're constipated, that stuff can be reabsorbed into your gut lining, which, for Tylenol, for example, what that can actually do is if it's not being, excreted properly, that can keep it being actually reabsorbed into your gut lining and back into your bloodstream. And that can actually keep the drug almost like active. So if you're taking it like regularly, that can actually lead to sometimes toxic levels. And that, in general can all just lead to obviously worsening some of your symptoms. So fiber plays a massive role in, obviously gut health, plays a role in regulating blood sugar levels, but it also plays a role in satiety, right? Because the more fiber you get in your diet, the higher satiety signal you're going to get. And it also means, like I said, you're choosing more nutrient-dense food sources for carb sources, which is really important. Now, something from a whole ballpark standpoint that we need to really avoid here is going to be low calorie or low carb extremes. And what we have to take into account is that this is a physiological stressor on your body. Okay, carbs have a massive role on your health, not just from digestive health, but also things like it regulates your cortisol and it regulates stress signaling. It does also play a role in thyroid conversion, which becomes extremely, important over the course of perimenopause. It's important no matter what, but that can become very vulnerable during a transition like this. And glucose is going to directly influence the conversion of your T4 into T3, which, that could be a whole other topic and a whole other video. If you actually do want to hear more about that, by all means, please leave a comment and actually let me know if you do want to learn more about this. I have a couple of videos on my Instagram page talking about thyroid health, breaking down like the actual mechanistics of it and how it all works and what, we need to actually kind of look into to address actual thyroid health. So I do have videos like that on my page. But if you do actually want to see a full video on that, I'd be more than happy to dive into that. But to kind of summarize really quickly, T3 is the only active form of thyroid in your body, and it needs to be converted from T4, which comes from your thyroid. And glucose is a really important, overall regulator of that process. It's needed to actually convert that hormone. So obviously we have shifts in that can start to happen. We can see adrenal health start to become impacted. That can impact serotonin, which is not only just your happy hormone, but it also plays a role in gut motility, which can also impact gut health. And all of this can become compromised in perimenopause, right? And the chronic restriction side of things, we have to be mindful of is that that's not just going to obviously fuel stress and cortisol, but it's also going to lead to a more muscle breakdown, which leads that we might be losing muscle, which can impact metabolic rate further, which is the opposite of what this phase really needs, right? We're already at higher risk for muscle loss and bone loss. We don't want to be fueling that process even further with that. Now, I think this kind of goes without saying, but limiting and avoiding alcohol during this phase is probably one of the best things you can do for yourself. Now, I'm not saying you can't have the occasional drink or glass of wine here and there, but a lot of women, you saw me talk about this in the last episode, it was 1 in 8 women actually tends to drink excessively during this time because of obviously the higher stress amount. So what we have to keep in account is what that can actually do downstream and impact. And that can start to disrupt your sleep. That can start to worsen hot flashes. It can start to impair liver-based hormone metabolism. So that can start to lead to just worse outcomes, worse shifts. It can impact lipolysis, which is your body's fat burning ability, even further because it does suppress that when you have alcohol in your system long term. And, we're just going to see worse outcomes from it. It's one of those things that quite literally has zero benefits in your body, even in small amounts. So the more you can cut it out and limit it, the better off that you're going to be. But bottom line, from a diet and nutrition standpoint here, You want to be prioritizing enough whole foods coming in, minimally processed foods, which also goes to say that, protein products, like also I'm a huge fan of like utilizing whey protein or protein bars when needed, but I do see that a lot of women sometimes will overdo that. Keep in mind it is still processed and we can still be missing a lot of nutrients if the one of the only protein sources you're getting in a day is coming from whey protein or protein bars. It is still processed food, and we want to be making sure that most of your food is coming from high micronutrient based food products. Single ingredient, more whole foods coming in is going to be paramount here. Healthier fat sources. The list goes on. More fibers, dense carbs. But we want to eat enough. We want to eat well, and I do recommend tracking caloric intake during this time. It can create a lot more mindfulness around are we over-consuming or under-consuming, which can really give you a lot more awareness as to what step you actually need to be taking to start to improve that right now. And this is going to help you to overall protect your muscle and make sure that we are supporting your metabolic rate and not actually trying to we're not like war with your metabolism right now. All these habits should line up to support the success of what you are trying to do with your goals, your body composition, etc. Now, sleep. This one, obviously, again, we should kind of know the importance of sleep at this point. If you've ever gotten a shitty night's sleep, I'm sure you know what that feels like. But sleep is not just for recovery, it is hormonal intervention. Your body literally rebuilds tissues, it's synthesizing hormones. There's so many things that are going on when you are sleeping. And poor sleep can drive cortisol up, it can drive insulin sensitivity down, it can actually lead to insulin resistance, and it can also dysregulate hunger hormones like ghrelin and leptin, which play a massive role in hunger cues and also satiety signaling. So feeling hungry and feeling full and satiated. So this can directly not just influence how your body burns or stores fat, but it directly influences your ability to, if you are in a calorie deficit or trying to adhere to a calorie deficit, it can directly make that harder by increasing your cravings and appetite and also, down-regulating your ability to feel full and satiated. So and this goes again without saying, but a good quality, overall routine around how many hours you should get a night should be a minimum of 7 to 9 hours. That is a non-negotiable in this phase. Anything less is going to lead to dysregulations. There's actually been studies done as well. I can't remember the study off the top of my head. I think I actually quoted it in the last video. But there was a study actually done that did show that there was actually dramatic increases in cortisol, decreases in testosterone. Everything got dysregulated when they actually looked at these values just due to, I think it was 5 hours after 1 week of poor sleep. So again, we can see a lot of really negative adaptations and shifts coming from that. So we're talking about optimizing your routine, right? Not only do we want to set you up to make sure that you have consistent sleep and wake times, which is going to regulate cortisol and melatonin. That's going to be the foundation of this all, because that's what's going to make sure you get enough sleep and you get good quality sleep. Okay, so finding a good, nighttime to fall when you want to fall asleep by, when you want to wake up by, and trying to keep that as consistent as possible. Our body loves homeostasis, it loves balance, so we want to make sure that we're setting that up properly. You want to make sure you're in a cool, dark room because we need a core body temp drop in order to actually initiate and maintain a deep sleep. That does play a big role. I'm sure you've noticed if you have hot flashes, you wake up really hot, you don't sleep very comfortably, and you toss and turn a lot. So making sure you have a cool environment is crucial. We also want to make sure we are cutting screens. At least I would say minimum will be 30 to 60 minutes before bed. But if you do need to be on screens at all for any reason, or maybe you like to just wind down and watch a little TV, I would highly recommend blue light glasses to make sure that you can be able to keep your body in a little bit more of a regulated circadian rhythm. Blue light is going to suppress melatonin production, and it does delay the sleep onset as well. So we want to make sure we are cutting that or putting on blue light glasses. But no matter what, the whole doom scrolling before bed, I know it feels relaxing. Believe me, I get it. I've done it before. But at the end of the day, it's actually keeping your brain overly stimulated, which is actually keeping you awake. It's not helping you fall asleep at all. If you're having trouble falling asleep, I would venture to say it's probably due to your bedtime routine, or maybe you need a little bit of mindfulness. Maybe you need a better wind down routine, something to actually calm your nervous system, regulate things. That can play a massive role in actually like helping you fall asleep better. If you're go, 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 and then you just try to lay in bed and go to bed, probably the reason you can't fall asleep right away. Your brain is still processing everything from that day. It never had a moment to stop. And that's a lot of women's problem that we work with who come to us. They're go, 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 and they never take time to relax. So you having a wind down routine of at least 15 to 20 minutes before bed, I think is crucial to actually be able to have your brain process the day, so that way you can actually lay your head down on the pillow and feel like you're able to fall asleep and feel rested. Once we have any clients that set anything up with this, any woman that we work with always have a better time sleeping, whether they're in postmenopause or perimenopause. That is a foundation. Now, avoiding alcohol, going to be another crucial one. I would say at least If you're going to drink, make sure you are drinking outside of a 3 hour before bed window. Cut that off, and obviously how much you drink is crucial as well. Just because you're cutting it off 3 hours before bed doesn't obviously mean that if you excessively drink throughout the day and day drink, that can still be in your system for days. So, keep in mind, if you are drinking during this phase, but you're struggling with health and you're struggling with fat loss, I would really start to question your choices with that. That's one of those things that I do consider non-negotiable. Drinking is going to affect every single result that you are trying to achieve with a program like this. Okay. Limiting caffeine intake is also going to be crucial here. All right. Caffeine has a half-life of 5 to 7 hours. So if you are drinking that later in the afternoon, obviously that can definitely still be active in you even leading into the later hours of the night. So I typically recommend cutting off caffeine at least 5 to 7 hours or more before you go to bed. Best practice would be trying to limit it to just the morning. Before noon, afternoon, I would really recommend cutting it. Okay. Now, moving on to training resistance versus cardio. Okay, resistance training is the priority. I think we kind of should know this already, but just to pull out a obvious research study that I think we have plethora of studies done on this already, so this isn't news, but this one is specifically actually done on postmenopausal women in the Frontiers in Endocrinology systematic review and meta-analysis of over 101 randomized control trials consisting of over 5,000 postmenopausal women. What they found was that resistance training produced significant increases in muscle mass, whereas aerobic training did not produce any significant increase in muscle gains. So obviously we have physical proof and research in most menopausal women that building muscle, obviously from resistance training versus aerobic training, is the route to go. And of the women who typically have more muscle, what you're going to see is you're going to see a higher metabolic rate, better insulin regulation. We're going to see that it protects against cardiovascular disease a lot better, protects against things like osteoporosis and sarcopenia, so bone and muscle loss. And it's also associated with less vasomotor symptoms like hot flashes. So you just overall are going to have a much better time navigating through menopause if you have more muscle in your frame. And I will say this in practice, I do find that most women who have more muscle in their frame typically are experiencing less severe outcomes from menopause itself. But we also want to take into account with this is that I'm not saying cardio itself is bad. Okay, I think that what I say here can be very easily misconstrued. Cardio is not the problem. It's how it's done and how it's prioritized over resistance training. So something to kind of point out here is that in moderation, it can be extremely powerful and beneficial. And there's lots of research to support that for cardiovascular health, for blood sugar regulation. We can 100% see that it has benefits. But when you're in a state of chronic high volume, chronic high intensity cardio, that can elevate cortisol, that can lead to accelerating muscle breakdown, and it can also actually be shown to increase in visceral fat storage due to obviously the already shift in higher cortisol levels with most perimenopausal women, and also you now driving that even further with higher intensity and higher volume training loads. Okay. Now, in perimenopause, the stress load is literally already high. So more cardio, especially more high-intensity cardio, can sometimes just add to that load. And something I like to prioritize at this time is obviously putting our energy towards what's going to work best, right? So if we're at risk for muscle loss, we probably should be focusing on more resistance training. That's going to build more muscle. You're going to have a much better outcome focusing on that as your main goal here. Okay, that doesn't again mean though that cardio itself is bad, but we need to make sure that we are managing that properly. So I typically would like a lot of my clients to focus on, and most of the time when they do, they get way better results, way better outcomes, is either focusing on just step counts. Just step counts is a crucial step to, no pun intended, to actually better daily movement throughout the day. Sometimes to be honest, I would rather see somebody focus on step counts and stay active throughout the day than just dedicating like 1 hour block of like activity. And then we can also sometimes see is that actually might lead to being less active throughout the day. I have a lot of women come to me and they're like, I work out 5 times a week, but then they look at their step counts of the day and they're like at like 3,000. It's okay, cool. You can't justify the fact that you worked out for an hour and just not move the rest of the day. So I think that actually, prescribing step counts works way better because it keeps you much more active throughout the day because you're focused on a kind of moving target as you go throughout the day. But if we do like cardio, obviously I'm not trying to, kind of ridicule away from cardio. I have a lot of clients that love to still do a little bit of cardio. If we do, I usually like to prioritize at least, minimum, I was going to say maximum of like 2 to 3 times a week, low intensity, 20, 30 minutes, whatever that cardio might look like for you, but we need to keep it low intensity. If you do any high intensity stuff, do it in moderation. It can be managed as long as it is in moderation. I would say no more than like, very similarly, like, maybe 1 to 2 times a week is some like, kind of high intensity, or like, higher volume if you're training for like a marathon, or like, you like to do a little more of like the high intensity style cardio, but making sure that it is managed well. And the foundation of your training should always be strength training. Once we prioritize that, better results always follow time and time again. And there's a lot of research to support that already. So obviously, again, that could also be a whole nother video in its own topic of its own right. But one of the most important things in this phase is making sure that we are monitoring for overtraining, because overtraining is a real risk in this phase. Okay, you are going to start to see that is going to impair insulin signaling. It's going to suppress thyroid output, lead to HPA axis dysfunction, so your adrenal health is going to decline or become hyperfunctional, and that can disrupt digestion. I see a lot of women that are overtraining, which can start to impact your gut health as well due to the stress impact on it, and especially if you are under recovered and fatigued, that's going to start to pull blood out of your GI tract, which we need, and go to your muscles to try to set inflammation where it is. And that can start to impact gut motility and peristalsis, which is things moving throughout your gut. So we can see constipation start to arise from that as well. But it's also keeping your body in more of a fight or flight mode. Keep in mind, if you're in a fight or flight mode and your body is more sympathetically driven as opposed to parasympathetically, which is rest and digest, your body's not prioritizing digestion if it feels like it's like under threat, right? And that threat is no different than you staring a bear in the face. Like, the bear is in the room and your body is like, until the bear is gone, it's not going to feel safe. And if you're constantly pushing and driving your body into the dirt, that's going to lead to there being a lot of signs and signals that your body is looking for you to back off. That can look like fatigue. It can look like worsening performance, increased cravings. It can look like poor sleep, mood changes. It can start to look like, obviously bloating. Like, there's a number of things that we can start to see that can be pointing to really poor recovery. And that is one of those things that we have to really stay mindful of during this phase. Now, I think as a practical starting point, if I was handling, obviously, one of my clients, protocols with this, one of the things that we focus on is 3 to 4 times a week of resistance training, no more than 2-3 times a week of some low intensity cardio. If they want to do high intensity cardio, I'm usually cutting the 2 to 3 of low intensity, and we're doing 1 to 2 of high intensity, capping that at least somewhere around 15 to 20 minutes per session, because that is very taxing on your body, and we do want to make sure that we are staying on top of your recovery with that. Think of it as like, it's a much higher intensity, so you want a much smaller window of that. There's a lot of research that we've even seen that has actually shown that, even just at like, there's one study that I can't remember off the top of my head the exact name of the study, but recently I actually talked about it on my Instagram, and it actually was done in healthy individuals, men and women, where they actually saw that over the course of 12 weeks, they gradually increased from like 3 30-minute sessions throughout the week up to like 60-minute sessions throughout the week of intervals, high intensity intervals on bikes, like the assault bikes. And what they actually saw was that over the course of those 12 weeks, they actually saw a metabolic decline. So insulin dysregulation, they saw high fatigue, like the athletes actually started to perform worse. So it all started to actually shift down. That was even with them maintaining adequate recovery. So we have to keep in mind that even in healthy individuals, there is a recovery component that starts to become missed. But typically, that's kind of where we like to sit. Foundation should always be strength training, and then we should obviously move throughout that to focus on, some side gigs throughout the way, depending on what that would look like for you and what you would prefer to do. If you don't like to do cardio, cool, you don't have to. I have a lot of clients that don't and see great results week after week. Now, the fourth, and also one of the most important ones, is going to be stress management here to kind of wrap things up. Stress management is not optional. It's paramount. Your HPA axis is already going to be dysregulated due to progesterone declining and also leaning on the adrenal glands a little bit more. And every unmanaged stressor becomes a hormonal burden on your body. Okay, this doesn't have to be complicated. It can literally be super simple, implemented throughout your day, small little routines. Even just something, a little check-in with yourself can go a really, really long way. So we have some very simple non-negotiables I like to focus on with my clients are going to be daily movement. I think this one could be crucial. Even a 20-minute walk actually is it's actually one of the only, outside of like yoga, forms of activity that actually can lower cortisol and lower stress and actually help increase recovery. So even just a 10 to 20 minute walk can help with managing stress and also regulate blood sugar a lot better. I'm a huge fan of post-meal walks for regulating digestion and blood sugar. They actually have seen pretty drastic decreases in a blood sugar response after a meal in studies to actually reduce that overall blood sugar burden after a meal. So that in practice works phenomenally. I do see that a lot. Even when I've had some clients actually look at their blood sugar after a meal with walking and after a meal without walking, and the difference is massive. Boundaries are crucial during this time. Okay, workload, relationships, screen time. We need to make sure that at this time in your life, you're taking some time back for yourself, which might feel a little bit selfish, but at the end of the day, it's selfless because you have to fill your cup up first. And I always tell my clients this: if you don't fill your cup up first, resentment starts to climb. You start to become more, irritable, and that's just obviously not going to be good for anybody, especially not you. So taking some more time back for yourself, setting those boundaries, I think is really, really important. Breath work and mindfulness are crucial. I love these. I think that they are huge for being able to regulate your nervous system, especially before bed. If you're not really into the whole woo-woo Zen stuff, keep in mind it doesn't have to be like Om kind of meditation. Like, it could literally just look like you just closing your eyes and taking a few deep breaths and just feeling your body just lose the tension, calm down, regulate. That can be massive, and it also can help a lot with even digestion. I have a lot of clients that are a little bit kind of hyped up throughout the day, and they're overstimulated. And when they sit down to eat, they're like rushing their meal. And one of the most important things I have them do is take 3 deep breaths before they eat. And every time they do that, they eat calmer, they have better digestion after that. Before bed, this can be extremely important to help make sure that you can lay your head down on the pillow and actually be able to fall asleep, not have your mind running a mile a minute. And I think one of the most overlooked ones is social connection. Chronically underrated as a stress buffer. I think isolation raises cortisol, and unfortunately, I think a lot of women kind of go into that isolation during this time, and I don't think that helps. I think finding communities, finding people who are like-minded, finding people who are also maybe you can share similar struggles with, and you can work on things together. Buddy systems work great. More connection, not isolation, I think can be huge here. And what I would really argue that you should find as well is people that are on a similar journey into working on their health. Not people who are going to bars and drinking all the time, because your environment is going to shape you. Your environment is going to shape your physiology. It's going to shape your hormone status. It's going to shape your body composition. If you aren't aligning with people who are on similar journeys or are already achieving those things, and you're looking up to those people and following their footsteps, you're going to have a harder time, trying to achieve the results that you want. And I see that so often, and I've had a number of women that have actually shifted their friend group and actually gotten different communities and different gyms and made new friends, and that was the game changer that they really needed. So I'm a really, really big fan of that. Now, if we're kind of putting this all together right now, none of these work in isolation, as you should be seeing already. This is all working together in tandem. The whole endocrine system, the only reason this all works is because they're all supporting the same systems. We're supporting the thyroid, we're supporting adrenal health, gut health, blood sugar regulation, all things that are becoming compromised. It's not a matter of focusing on one little thing. We have to focus on everything with tasks and habits that are going to support everything. And it doesn't mean that we have to override and do a 180 with your routines, but starting small and building up can be huge. And when all of those systems are supported, your body is going to finally start to respond better when the environment is set up for your body to actually start to heal. And we can actually start to see the fat loss becomes a lot easier, and you're not working tooth and nail to try and get the results that you're looking for. And this is literally a root method in practice. It's creating the conditions for your body to actually do what it's designed to do, as opposed to us trying to always force that. Now, next episode, we are going to actually tie in and talk about other routes of support, such as supplementation and bioidentical hormonal replacement therapy, which I think is wildly misconstrued. And it has been really overlooked for many years. And I think that we need to talk about that a little bit more. It's coming to light a little bit more now with more recent research. But I think that there's a lot of women, a lot of doctors that are still not really caught up to speed with it. So I do like to talk about that because I think that can be a game changer for a lot of women. But if this episode helped you to understand perimenopause in a more practical way, subscribe on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. And please share this episode on your social media platforms. It helps more women to actually understand their bodies better. It's always helpful to leave a quick rating and a short review with your biggest takeaway. also helps more women to be able to find the show. Feel free to reach out to me on Instagram and tell me what other topics you want me to break down next. Resources and next steps are in the description, my friend. You are built for better, and I will see you on the next one.